hey, it's you, the viewer. Thanks for tuning in. Today's topic is Super Mario Bros. Wonder and Sonic Superstars, two 2D platformers which happen to launch in the same week this October. I think it'll be really fun to compare these two titles, so let's get to that. Hi everyone, it's time to compare Sonic Superstars and Super Mario Bros. Wonder, which happened to release in the exact same week, which is a pretty bizarre coincidence. Sonic Superstars had the October release date originally, and then Super Mario Wonder joined it later on. Since these two games are actually attempting similar things, I think it's well worth comparing the two and seeing where they succeed and where they perhaps fail. I won't go so far as to say it's quite hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby, but it's also not as far off as I might have hoped. I come into these games with, I'd say, no real bias for one against the other. Sonic has been a lifelong enjoyment of mine. I played the original in one of those plug-and-play systems with like 6 different Genesis titles. One of them was Sonic the Hedgehog. And then Mario, of course, I have quite a lot of experience with. Been playing that for quite some time. In terms of 2D Mario, my first real experience of that was New Super Mario Bros. On the DS, which I loved at the time, and honestly I think is still probably the strongest of the New Super Mario Bros. Series. That might be somewhat controversial, but that one I always consider it to be the peak of the series, just in terms of originality, and where it was placed, I think, made a lot more sense than when you get to New Super Mario Bros. Wii, 2, and U, which kind of all attempt the same thing and feel quite similar. New Super Mario Bros. I think has a little bit more identity, because it was the first time that was attempted, and has some more unique things about it. Anyhow, let's get on to the comparisons. We're going to go through different categories and score the games on how they do, and we'll give a point to the game which succeeds most in that category. First category is graphics. Sonic Superstars has an uneven and honestly disappointing presentation on Switch. I'll only really be talking about how it looks on the Switch system, since that's the system I played it on, and it wouldn't really make sense for me to compare it to, say, the PC version or the PS5 version, which I've not played. And I have heard that the game was made with the Switch in mind, so I think it's perfectly reasonable to use that as a comparison point for Super Mario Bros. Wonder, since they are both running on the same console. At first, Sonic does appear attractive enough, but the more I played, the more the cracks started to show in the title's visuals. There is some strong conceptual work that was put into the game's environments. They look pretty nice, actually, at first glance. However, the end result does often feel unfinished and lackluster, which is unfortunate, as it's certainly within the Switch's capabilities to deliver beautiful-looking 2D platformers which utilize 3D models. This is quite likely a compromise taken in order to get Superstars running properly at 60 frames per second on the console. Some examples of games which boast both silky 60 frames per second and great visuals on the Switch system include Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe, and of course a certain other game that was released in the same week. I wonder what that might be. The visual quality, while nice at times, does come across as bland more often than not. I do wonder if Sega made the right choice in switching to 3D for this title, as Mania, which released in 2017, managed to look and run exceptionally well on Switch in that year. Now, well over a half-decade later, the latest 2D Sonic title doesn't feel like that much of a leap, despite the use of 3D characters and environments, which some might see as an enhancement, but the end result just didn't really work out for me as well as the pixel graphics in Mania did. Dare I say the game did remind me at times of Mighty No. 9 and some other visually unpleasant 2D platformers.
Let me ask you a question. Do you like awesome things that are awesome?
Especially in the case of the explosion effects. I hate to say it, but the comparison speaks for itself. The visuals just look a bit dated by modern standards. The texture quality is often noticeably low, and many environments feel flat and uninspired. And in terms of the selection of environments, they feel very similar to other 2D Sonic games. These are all new zones, which is commendable, but the zones themselves don't feel that much different from what we've seen in Sonic's past, and some of them actually look worse than zones in previous Sonic games. Like I said, Sega claimed that Switch was the target console for this release, but I'm not sure if that effort really shows in the final version, apart from the mostly consistent frame rate, which is good, but there's some issues there too. I can personally attest that the attempt to keep the game running smoothly has certainly not been fully successful. In the finale of the game, there are some unforgivable frame drops which directly caused multiple deaths for me, which was extremely frustrating. Skip to this time code if you don't want to see a clip of the final boss. This is really just not very acceptable in a $60 AAA release in a major franchise like Sonic, and makes me question the decision to release Superstars with such a glaring issue. Transitioning from 2D pixel graphics to 3D models is not inherently a lateral upgrade, and I question the decision if the end result looks so unimpressive as it does in the case of Superstars. Previous classic-style Sonic games have had visuals that stood the test of time, and they still look great in my opinion even 30 years later. Superstars graphics don't live up to modern standards today in 2023, so I can scarcely imagine just how dated they'll look in a few years' time. There's also some pretty egregious load times for a title that is, as simplistic as this. Dying can be pretty frustrating just because it takes so long to load back into the game. I will say the game does look quite a lot better in handheld mode than in TV mode. I think that's just because some of the 3D models look kind of just pixelated and jaggy, whereas that's not quite as much the case in handheld mode since it's on a smaller screen. So that's what I think about the graphics in Sonic Superstars. Now we're going to go to Super Mario Bros. Wonder. The visuals in Mario Wonder are breathtakingly beautiful. They push the 2D Mario series forward further than any of the new titles ever did. Like I mentioned, I really liked the original New Super Mario Bros., but in terms of its visual presentation, it's pretty basic, and that continued on for that sub-series up until U, which kind of just looks like a more HD version of the DS title, without too many improvements other than the sheer amount of pixels on screen. So while those games looked okay, they took a very safe approach to modernizing the classic series. Mario Wonder, however, in terms of how it looks, plays, and sounds, is an evolution rather than being strictly iterative as the new games were. The animations in particular are far more expressive than ever before, utilizing key poses in a vein similar to how the sprite-based games did. Level variety is another strong point. While the level themes are often familiar, the execution of these locales is unique and highly pleasing to the eye. The game also runs extremely well and only has a few moments of frame rate drops, all of which occur in the overworld, so they aren't very consequential to actual gameplay. The loading times are also very, very short, and it's quite fast to get back into the action if you die. That's our first category done, and pretty clearly, in my opinion, the winner is Super Mario Bros. Wonder. I wouldn't say Sonic Superstars is a total disaster in terms of its graphics, but there's a lot of room for improvement, whereas in Mario Wonder's case, I think you could argue that it's the best looking 2D Mario game ever. Certainly, in my opinion, the best looking 2D Mario game to take advantage of 3D graphics. It just looks fantastic and runs extremely well, so no complaints here. Our next category is music. For Sonic Superstars, I found the music to be largely enjoyable, though I can't say it stands apart as a high point for the series. I found that while many of the songs are legitimately great, some others felt as though they were held back by the commitment to the Genesis sound font and came across as a bit dated as a result. Take a listen to this one. Don't love that. The instrumentation specifically just doesn't feel modern in a way that I didn't feel was the case for Sonic Mania. A lot of it comes down to this specific, sort of pop sound effect that just is used constantly throughout the soundtrack and just doesn't really fit, in my opinion, in a modern soundtrack, especially at the frequency it's used. It makes it sound a bit too much like a Genesis game, whereas I don't think that's really necessary, given that this is a modern game and it's trying to be a modern game in many ways, but I don't know. They just really want to get across that classic Sonic feel, and I feel like it is a detriment in some cases. There are certainly some really great tracks in this game, but overall the OST isn't nearly as consistent as I would have liked. In the case of Mario Wonder, the music is simply delightful. It often works in tandem with the level design to create truly memorable moments. For instance, when the elephant power-up is in use, the instrumentation of the main melody changes, which is an incredible touch. The wonder flowers in each level also alter the music, changing the melody and tone to convey the insanity that often occurs. Some levels also utilize music in really clever ways. The tone is set really early on in the game when in the second level you're treated to a Piranha Plant musical. And honestly, I can't think of a better way to kick off a Mario title than that. It was really a magical moment to discover that. So in terms of music, I think Mario is the clear winner, in my opinion. Sonic Superstars does have some really great tracks in there, but the consistency is just not nearly as high as in Mario, and I think Mario uses the music in way more clever ways. It's quite innovative in that way. This is a short category, but something I really pay attention to with new Switch releases, and that's HD Rumble. In Sonic, the HD Rumble only really occurs when you hit enemies, and it's nice, but that's about it. At least it does have some form of rumble, but I can't say it's a particularly inspired use of the feature. In Mario Wonder, the HD Rumble is among the best Nintendo has ever done, actually. Almost every action has an associated rumble effect, some of which actually utilize the Switch controller's ability to create music in a similar way to some other Switch games like Kirby Star Allies. It's not quite as drastic as that, but it is noticeable and quite appreciated. There's also a surprising amount of configurability. Personally, I had mine set on strong, but you can also change it to weak. There's a surprising amount of options, which is really great. Our next category is voice acting. Mario Wonder features some pretty exceptional voice acting. I was skeptical going in of the new voices. Mario, Luigi, Nabbit, Yoshi, and Daisy all have new voice actors. As far as the reasoning behind this change, I really don't have any idea, but nonetheless, the new voice actors provide really great performances. Another new addition to the world of Mario is the talking flowers, which appear frequently in every level throughout the game. I initially thought that I would find these annoying based on trailers and preview footage, as they're all voiced by the same actor. As it turns out, I actually really enjoyed their inclusion. There's a certain level of surrealism to having talking flowers pop up throughout the game, all of which have the exact same voice, and they say some, at times, bizarre things.
I can feel the power! Take me with you!
They also provide encouragement and verbally congratulate you for completing difficult tasks, and a fair amount of the voices are legitimately funny, so I really actually liked this addition to the world of Mario. It was not something I expected, certainly, but because of that, it was a pleasant surprise to see how much I actually liked them. And this is what I have to say about the voice acting in Sonic Superstars.
There is none.
The next category is gameplay. So for Mario Wonder, the gameplay is exceptionally strong. The character movement and new features really add to the 2D Mario experience. The level designs are really great, and specifically the addition of Wonder Flowers really makes this title stand out from its predecessors. They're an exceptional mechanic, and it's always a ton of fun to find the Wonder Flower and discover what new wacky feature is introduced. The level variety is also really great, in part thanks to the Wonder Flowers, as well as the new power-ups. There's Bubble, Elephant, and Drill, and these provided quite a lot of gameplay variety. They're quite unique in the Mario series, and I really enjoyed them. There's also lots of new enemies, which is something I thought was extremely lacking in the new Super Mario Bros. Games. They tended to reuse a lot of classic enemies and not introduce that many new ones. Whereas in the case of Wonder, you're finding new enemies all the time. The overworld map is also really great. There's quite a lot of hidden things to discover, and it just works very well at connecting the different levels. There's the conventional levels, but there's also badge challenges and enemy arenas. I think in a lot of ways you can sort of see some Mario Maker inspiration in this game, and I think that comes across in the different types of levels. There's some that are pretty short, whereas there's others that are quite long. Badges are another new mechanic. In previous Mario games, characters often had different features that they could take advantage of, like Peach could float and Luigi could sort of hover in the air by kicking his legs. In this game, that's sort of gone, but the replacement for it is that you can equip different badges which give you different attributes, some of which are quite useful. There's a grappling hook, there's a spin jump move, and quite a few more, and there's some which are more made to just assist players. For example, one of them allows you to start a level with the mushroom already equipped, and some of them even provide additional challenge, like the badge which makes Mario invisible, or the one which makes him always run. So I think gameplay in this title is just exceptionally strong, and probably the most innovative 2D Mario game since Mario Bros. 3, honestly. It's got tons of new features and really changes up the formula. One thing that's been removed is the timer. In essentially every 2D Mario game before this point, you had a timer, and if it ran out, you died. In this game, there is no such pressure, which I think was a good decision. I will say it's a little bit strange that lives have continued to be a part of the 2D Mario games for Wonder. In a lot of other modern 2D platformers, lives have kind of gone by the wayside because they kind of don't make that much sense in modern titles, in my opinion, as they kind of just punish players who don't have as high a skill level, whereas for players like myself who have a fair deal of experience with 2D platformers, they're kind of meaningless, as you're never really going to run out of them. So it only really affects players that don't know what they're doing as well, which just feels a bit weird, which I think perhaps is maybe a slight flaw, not a major one, since I do enjoy the process of collecting lives. It's kind of a classic Mario experience, but it's also not very necessary for the overall gameplay experience. I don't really mind it that much. I'm just a bit surprised that it made the jump when so many other features have been significantly altered, like the removal of the timer. The gameplay in Sonic Superstars is overall pretty good. I enjoyed this to a similar degree as I have other 2D Sonic games in terms of the overall level design and gameplay functionality. The physics are apparently taken straight from Sonic Mania. The physics in Sonic Mania are really good, so it makes sense to bring them over for this new title. I wouldn't say that the level design is quite as strong or interesting as that game. I feel like Mania introduced quite a few fun and unique mechanics, and the new mechanics introduced in Sonic Superstars just aren't quite as enjoyable. For instance, the Chaos Emeralds now provide you with a different power. Each one gives you a different ability, and these are optional to complete the game, and I felt like the game was kind of a bit too easy as is, so I just didn't really feel a need to make use of that. But, you know, it's fine. Just sort of a feature that's there, but I didn't really feel a need to take advantage of it. There's also 4 different playable characters, which was cool. They have their classic abilities, like Tails can fly, Knuckles can glide, Amy has a hammer and can double jump, so that provides some gameplay variety. On a slight tangent, there's a few bonus costumes in this game, specifically the Lego costumes, which feature characters based on the Lego minifigures that were released this year, which is pretty cool, but this is also paid, which is weird, and honestly not really worth the price. I don't know if it's really worth going out of your way to get, honestly. I thought that the minigames in this were okay, but maybe not the best. They've brought back the classic Sonic minigame from Sonic 1. This works okay, though there isn't much reason to do it, as it only provides medals, which are used for buying cosmetics in battle mode, which isn't something I played that much, so there wasn't much reason for me to play this minigame. And then the minigame for collecting Chaos Emeralds, I didn't enjoy that much. I think it starts out very easy, but then it gets kind of difficult, and that difficulty curve felt a bit out of whack, because it kind of just jumped to becoming quite a bit more difficult without much build-up, and just wasn't the most fun Sonic minigame I can think of. Our next category is boss fights. The boss fights in Mario Wonder are honestly mildly disappointing. There are only really different variants of Bowser Jr., who makes use of the Wonder Flower to change the arena, but the core mechanic of jumping on Bowser Jr.'s head, then dodging him while he's rolling around in his shell, and then jumping on him again, that core cycle is utilized in all the different boss fights, except for the final boss. I think they're okay, but that felt a bit safe in a game which has so many new and creative features. The boss fights just felt somewhat lacking in comparison to the rest of the game. With that said, the final boss is really amazing, and it's quite likely the best boss in any 2D Mario game, and honestly rivals the final bosses of many 3D Mario games. Sonic Superstars does have a good amount of different bosses. Overall, they're pretty good, but some are better than others. A lot of bosses I felt took too long to take down. There's a lot of downtime while you're waiting for them to become vulnerable, and that could be a bit grating at times. I thought the final boss was kind of frustrating in terms of just how long you have to wait for it to become vulnerable while it's in the background. It reminds me a bit of the infamous Pribbit boss from Kirby Triple Deluxe, where it spends most of the time in the background, which just can be kind of annoying. I will say that in terms of variety, it does have Mario Wonder beat, but the final boss in Mario Wonder is just so exceptional that I think it outclasses anything that's in Sonic Superstars. Even though the Bowser Jr. boss fights are somewhat repetitive, I do think overall the boss fights are stronger in Wonder. Story. So the story in Sonic Superstars isn't anything amazing. It has a few nice animated cutscenes, and it introduces a new character and reintroduces a classic character in Fang and this other robot-type character as Eggman's henchman, which was a fun dynamic. But other than that, it's a pretty basic Sonic story. Eggman is still the main villain, and you fight him several times throughout the game, and then the game ends when you defeat him. And it's really not particularly imaginative. Not terrible, but not great either. Sometimes throughout throughout levels, you do see characters doing stuff in the background, like Tails will be flying around or Amy will be doing something, and that's kind of fun. But other than that, I don't really have too much else to say about the story. It's just not really at the forefront of the game. Mario Wonder similarly has a pretty basic Mario story. Bowser has taken control of the Flower Kingdom and turned himself into a literal castle, which is kind of a fun new twist. So it's not like narratively phenomenal, but it does add something to the experience. And we do have the new Caterpillar Prince character who accompanies you throughout the journey. And there's a little more dialogue than you would normally get in 2D Mario games. And you have new NPCs with the Poplins, which are basically this game's toads for the Flower Kingdom. And the fact that the game takes place in a locale that is not the Mushroom Kingdom is actually a bit refreshing and allows them to have different looking environments and characters. And each area has sort of a self-contained mini story, like for example in the desert, Bowser Jr. has stolen all the water. So it's just little mini vignette stories like that for each different world, which I think adds a bit to the experience. It makes it a bit more charming and gives it a bit more personality than you might have seen in previous 2D Mario games. In previous Mario games, basically the goal was to get to the castle at the end of the world, and that's about it. Whereas in this game, there's a little more going on. Not a ton, but just enough to add a little bit of flavor to it. The next category is multiplayer. To clarify, I didn't actually play local multiplayer for either of these titles, so I won't be comparing that, but both games do have a form of online play with random other players, which I did try out for both, so I'll be discussing that. In the case of Mario Wonder, the online multiplayer actually works surprisingly well as a mechanic. You see the shadows of players who are currently playing going throughout the level, and you can sort of play alongside them without them really getting in the way or causing too much of a distraction. I thought I wouldn't really enjoy this feature or utilize it much, but I did actually like it quite a lot. You can revive other players if they die, and also place standees throughout levels to also provide revive points for player ghosts if they die. So it does make the game a bit easier, but you can also just press L and R to kill yourself if you don't want to be revived as a ghost. It's a little bit like a sort of Dark Souls-esque mechanic where it's sort of passive, concurrent online multiplayer, which is just a fun, interesting idea, which I haven't really seen that much in other 2D games. It's also fun to see all the different varieties of characters. There's quite a lot of characters in Mario Wonder. They all control the same, except for Yoshi, who has his flutter jump and eating attack. All the Yoshis and Nabbit don't take damage, whereas the other characters do. And the other characters can also collect power-ups, whereas Yoshis and Nabbit cannot. So that adds a fun dynamic to multiplayer, seeing all these different characters running around. So I actually really liked that. Not something I used all the time, but when I was at home, connected to the internet, I did take advantage of it quite a lot. Similar to Mario Wonder, I did not take advantage of the local play for Sonic Superstars. I did, however, take part in a few battles in the online battle mode, which I thought was okay. Not really a standout feature, and that does present a slight problem in that the majority of the game's collectibles are medals, which are used to purchase cosmetic items for your robot character in battle mode. And if you're not really interested in the battle mode, then these medals aren't very worthwhile. I thought the different game modes provided some variety, but didn't feel very polished. There is one really fun feature which I really liked in battle mode, which is that there is a Lego level where you race across Green Hill Zone, but in its Lego form, which actually utilizes the designs that are seen in the official Lego sets. It does feel a little bit like advertising to have so many of the Lego Sonic elements in this game, but I do like seeing them in a video game form, so I can't really complain too much. But other than that one feature, I didn't really love the battle mode, and it's not something I see myself coming back to very frequently. Now it's time for our conclusion, where we'll get the final verdict. If you look at the scorecard, Mario is the clear winner, and I think that's often been the case when you compare Mario games and Sonic games. Mario games just tend to feel like they have a higher budget and more care put into development. Not that the Sonic developers are not passionate about what they're making, but the end result of Nintendo's efforts are often more impressive, as is the case here. Honestly, it's a bit unfortunate that both games released the same week, as I might have felt a bit more positively about Sonic if I didn't have Mario Wonder to compare it to directly, which I think shows the proper way to modernize a classic 2D platformer franchise, whereas Sonic is, I think, a bit too iterative and doesn't have too much of its own identity compared to the classic titles, whereas Mario Wonder certainly does. And while both utilize 3D models for graphics, I think Mario does it far better and in a more impressive and unique way than Sonic does. Sonic's visuals just look quite flat by comparison. I'll put it like this: I think that Sonic Superstars is quite likely not among the best 2D Sonic platformers that have ever been made, whereas in Mario Wonder's case, I can definitely say that it compares extremely positively to previous 2D games, especially the new series ones that have been made in the past 20 years. If you think about Mario as a series, we really haven't gotten a proper 2D Mario game since New Super Mario Bros. U. Since then, it's only been Mario Maker and re-releases of Mario U. So this is quite a big deal, and then looking back even further, we haven't had a non-new sub-series Mario game since Mario World, which is pretty crazy to think of since that was such a long time ago. So with Mario, it feels like they've taken modern sensibilities and applied them to Mario in a way which is extremely compelling and unique, and stands alongside the classic games, but in Sonic's case, it just doesn't reach the heights of those classic titles, and its attempts at modernization just aren't as effective. So I'd certainly recommend Mario Wonder over Sonic Superstars if you're looking for one or the other. Sonic does have its own merit to it, but Mario Wonder, I'd say, is far more successful in just about every category, as I've detailed in the video. So thanks for tuning in, fellow gamers, and I hope to talk to you again soon. Those are just my thoughts on these titles. Thank you for listening. One day soon, I may be making a new video, so that'll be very exciting when it does indeed happen. Till then, bye-bye.